Fish don't exist. I'm sure you've heard something like this before. There's no way to call something a fish that wouldn't also include us as a fish, at least genetically speaking. I think a very intuitive way to think about this is a shark. Like, a shark is pretty much fish looking, right? But sharks don't have bones, because their spot in the evolutionary tree was taken up before we had bones. They've just kind of stayed more or less the same ever since. They're older than trees, for crying out loud. The fun thing about that is all the side effects. As previously mentioned, no bones. But it's also weird what they did with their skin. This is an old katana from, I believe, around the 1700s. But if you look at this handle, I'll probably have a photo up on the screen right now, there's these bumps on it. And that is actually shark skin, specifically called dermal dentricles. And it's basically biology going, what do we use? We haven't evolved skin yet. Let's go with teeth. But focusing on the katana here for a little bit, this is an incredibly interesting blade. The reason for that is actually not quite what you would think. It's a shame this blade is so rusted. So there's these stories of like mythical Japanese blades or whatever, but they really weren't that different from your typical medieval sword. So then why do you get all these things about like bloom furnaces and like how they made them and all that stuff? It has to do with the quality of their iron. Because the way you made a katana is you would basically get this lump of iron called a tamagane, and you would hammer out the impurities over and over and over again. Now what's interesting is the iron itself there. In places like Europe and Asia, where you could source iron from miles and miles away, they could just make their swords with the highest quality stuff right off the bat. In Japan, since it was so isolated, they had to work with what they got. And so all those stories about like folding and blah 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 with the katanas, so what Japan basically had to use iron sand to make katanas. And actually like 80% or something like that of the iron mined today comes from one type of formation. It's called banded iron formations. And this is an extinct rock. So in geology, there's this thing called Uniformitarianism, which is basically says the key to the past is the present. Like, we can see how volcanoes work now, and we can compare that with volcanoes of the past. Well, this doesn't really work for banded iron formations. There is actually some debate as to where this iron came from. It either came from like hydrothermal vents or continents as they got eroded, but one way or another, this iron ended up in the ocean. In today's oceans, there's a lot of oxygen in the water, so any iron in there basically just immediately reacts with it. But nearly 2 billion years ago, there wasn't much oxygen to go around. So any iron that went into the ocean would basically just cover the seafloor. And what's really weird is in banded iron formations, you get this pattern of silica, iron, so on and so on. And this is why I'm calling it an extinct rock. I'm calling it an extinct rock because it requires low oxygen in the oceans. And the oxygen levels in the world are just too high for that. So we can't make this rock anymore. At least not on the geologic scales that it used to be made at.